On the 12th day of Christmas, Moose brings to me the fall of the House of Usher with Randal Silvey.
Welcome, Horror Hounds, to another installment of the 13 Horrifying Days of Christmas. I'm your host and gift giver, Moose. Today's gift is a tale as old as time, and I'm not talking about Beauty and the Beast. I told you he'd be back. We're bringing back the Grolix Growler, Randal Silvey, and we're deep diving with spoilers into the fall of the House of Usher. So please welcome Mr. Randal Silvey.
He threatened you that I'd be back, and I'm back. Hey, what's going on? I'm here.
It was a threat, it was a promise, and everything came in.
I feel a little bit like this is the first time you've had me on. Well, maybe not. That's not true. I was gonna say this is the first time you've had me on that wasn't some attempt to bait some saltiness out of me, some arguments, because I got nothing to argue
I
with.
was thinking about it because, this is the first time that we've recorded together where I'm pretty sure we're almost on the same page with this series as far as outcome and expectation, and there's not too many varying opinions on how this was produced and directed and just
Right.
total package.
I guess like the zombie, the Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead episodes were pretty close too, but yeah. I mean, spoilers for our discussion, but I've got nothing but good things to say today.
Yeah, no. As far as this being, Mike Flanagan's swan song for Netflix, Fall of the House of Usher couldn't have been a better parting gift for his horror time at Netflix. I mean, this is how you take, when we talked a couple months back about Children of the Corn and doing a short story, this is how you do a short story. Fall of the House of Usher isn't a long, epic tale. It is just a short story. But he managed to make it interesting. He managed to make it compelling and pulled elements from other Poe stories to move it along. And this should be the archetype for how short stories are done in the future.
Yeah, it's super interesting as an adaptation because it's kind of an homage just to the work of Poe overall, because it's not like accurately adapting any of it necessarily,
No.
but it's pulling from all of it. I mean, obviously, if you read through like the episode titles, each one is titled after a different Poe story or poem, but even within there, he's just taking elements and weaving it all together to tell kind of his own story.
It's he modifies the House of Usher into this modern day family, this modern day fucked up family, and we watch as the family systematically falls to just dies off, and I'm glad it all dropped at once.
Mm-hmm.
Because had it been like a weekly drop, it would have been a nail biting. You need that next episode.
Right.
It was very much it was like a drug, which is interesting considering that was the throughway for the story was a drug. But this very much was like a drug. You had to have that next story. You just needed it.
Yeah, Melanie and I binged through it pretty quick. And I kind of wish I didn't rewatch it for this discussion, and I kind of wish I had, because I'm curious as to how it comes across on a second viewing, because now it's only just barely over a month since it was released, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. But the first time through, you're kind of like, where is this? How is this going to wrap up? Where is this going? And I'm curious as how it all plays out the second time through. I bet there's like little things I probably missed on the first time through that you'll get after you see how it all kind of comes together. But then also to touch on something else you mentioned is it's it's not subtle with its social commentary. Like there's
No.
definitely a message to this, and I'm a little surprised. I mean, although I don't know what D-bag would push back against this message, but I'm a little surprised I haven't heard, just because the internet's such a like, they love a good fight. They'll fight over the dumbest things. I haven't heard a lot of like kickback against there being like that level of social commentary in this.
Yeah, no, it's been surprisingly quiet. And yeah, there were 2 or 3 different like social commentary messages throughout this tale. And it's just like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like Flanagan and his team just threw it out there too. Like there was no, well, we're going to dance around it. No, any message they wanted to put out, they just threw it out and said, here we are. I mean, between drugs, between internet, I mean, they hit every cue, and it was intense, and it was great all at the same time. Like this, and I think a lot of it, is his swan song. So he's like, I'm not going to hold any punches, and he held nothing back on this.
Yeah, it's interesting, like comparing. I had read before this came out. I don't know. He had said something in an interview or something about he was excited for it because like the use of it was just it was different and much more unchained than or unrestrained than most of his previous work in like the violence. And then also I remember him specifically calling out like the use of color, and he said it's very much like a more like a giallo film than his other work. And yeah, I see it. I see it. Not that he hasn't had gore or violence in his other stuff, but this one is much more. It's a departure from his other stuff because it's less character driven, although it is kind of it's more not so much character driven as it is like relationship driven. It's driven by that, but it's also
it's
much
relationship
more
and story driven unless we're focusing on this character
and the kills. And he's never really been a like slasher style, and this is not really a slasher, but it is in that it's kind of like dictated by like, okay, this episode someone's gonna die, and that's kind of the pacing of it, is who's gonna die next and how.
Who's gonna die and how they're gonna die and how epic will it be. And they come out of the gate with an epic kill. I mean, an acid bath?
Right. Was that the first one? So the first episode was all set up, huh? And then they kick it off with, yeah, okay. That was the Mask of the Red Death, episode 2.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, they kick this thing off with, we're just going to clear a room with a sprinkler system filled with acid. And it's like, holy shit. That's, like you said, I mean, it's a huge departure from what he really does. But as a viewer, fun to watch. And also, like, that sounds weird, but it's not something that happens in a lot of horror movies. So it's new, it's different. It's not the same old of, oh, this is how this person's going to die.
And at the same time, like that scenario specifically is super predictable, but I think it was intentionally predictable. Like the setup, they set it up at the end of the first episode, really. Like you got to assume that's where it's going, right?
Yeah.
As soon as he says he's going to throw a party there, you're like, oh, I know it. And they made a point to point out the like what he thinks are big water tanks on the roof. And so I think it's intentional to have it be kind of predictable, because then that whole next episode, you've got dread of like, how bad is this going to be? It's going to happen. Like you kind of know it's going to happen. How bad is it going to be? What's the deal with Verna? Like pretty early on, you still don't know what the deal with her is. She shows up in the red hood and all
But so she
that.
was a lady in red, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, this is when we're starting to see her kind of pop in and make her presence known. And yeah, you don't realize to what extent this acid bath is going to be. And then it happens. You're just like, oh my God.
And the one
That is
lady, you're like,
brutal.
lady, the aunt or whatever. It's like, get out of there, lady. Listen to Verna. Just get out of there. What are you doing? You
It's like,
shouldn't be there anyway.
she told you to get out. And you're just
Yep.
like, should I? Shouldn't I? And you wait too long. And now at this point, you're a plot point for the rest of the movie. Series.
Right. And I kind of expected her to be done. And then she actually has, even though she has minimal like interaction, a big impact in the later episodes. And I said, it's not really character driven, but that's not to say the characters aren't well written. It's just everyone's like it is character driven in that, like, that's kind of what makes it compelling. Like, that's what drives most of it. But and Flanagan's great at characters, but they're so like everyone's kind of despicable. And that's maybe the biggest departure is he's usually like, especially on this big cast, it's a good mix of people, like most people realistically in the gray area, where almost everybody here is just really kind of a villain.
I see it. Almost the entire family was a piece of shit.
Right.
There was one redeemable family member. And even that, ultimately, she ends up dying too, the little girl.
Oh, I loved that's much later in the season, but I loved how that was handled. I thought that was great.
Yeah, it was, super, like, I don't want to say casual, but, as far as, death visiting her essentially and reassuring her that her death would be meaningful, as opposed to the rest of the family who, deserved it.
It's interesting because this whole series is a family dealing with literally a member of them dying each episode and dealing with that. And yet I think the most compassionate performance we get is from Death herself, is from Verna, the Raven.
Yeah.
When she's talking to the girl towards the end.
Well,
that's like, kind of interesting.
I mean, when she goes into that room at this point, like, we've watched, Verna go through all these episodes, show up before somebody dies, and she goes into the room, and you're just like, oh no, not her too, and it's like, okay, how is she gonna die? And it was peaceful. She was the only one in the family to really have a peaceful death, and I think that's really fitting, since she wasn't an asshole like the rest of the family.
Right.
But I mean, jumping backwards, our second death, we had the daughter brutalized by a monkey or chimpanzee. I'm sorry.
This was super interesting because this was like, really, to me, felt super out of left field, but this is a kill that's a direct tie to the stories. And in that respect, it's admirable that they were able to, like, somebody gets murdered by a chimpanzee or whatever. How are we going to work that in? And it makes sense. They made it, the whole, like, and it's not even, the chimp connection isn't even from her necessarily. It's from one of the other daughters. But yeah, I don't know. This was kind of out of left field to me, but still pretty good, and is actually one of the more kind of on the nose kills in it.
Now, the Black Cat episode, I think, is probably one of my favorite episodes in this series, because we watched the one son lose his ever fucking mind. It's ultimately, you find out it's all, an implanted vision, but he thought he murdered his lover's cat. And it hints of, like, the telltale heart. He's guilted by this dead cat, and he goes and replaces this cat, and you get shades of Pet Cemetery, where it's this cat's just fucking evil, and he's tearing up his apartment with Thor's hammer.
Yeah. This one is one of the closer. Sorry, go ahead.
And it was fun to watch his descent into madness.
I really like that actor a lot. Raul, I can't remember his last name offhand. And this could maybe sidestep into a topic real quick too. But I was going to say, this story is one of the closer, apparently, to the Poe stories, The Black Cat, in which a guy, supposedly an animal lover, kills a cat and then replaces it, kind of goes mad. And the difference is he ends up taking an axe to his wife in an attempt to get the cat, and then bricks her up in the wall, which is a recurring theme. But
I say Poe like to brick people up in walls.
Yeah, put them in the floor, put them in the wall. He loves that.
I think he had a complex.
I was going to say, so this is also something super interesting. Flanagan likes to work with the same people. And it's kind of like, once you're in, there's no getting out, because they keep coming back. Obviously, he's great to work with, right? Because they keep coming back. And this one, I mean, obviously being the latest one, but also is like the most return Flanagan players, really. There's like 21 or 22 people that returned from project to work on this from previous projects that he's worked on, including Raul. And he's great. I first seen him on Funhouse. He'd show up on the YouTube channel Funhouse back in the day. He'd show up as a guest once in a while, and that's where he caught my eye. Apparently, he was on iZombie, which I never watched. Was it iZombie on CW? I think
so. Yeah.
But he showed up in Midnight Mass, and I thought he was great in that. And it's interesting, like oh no, it wasn't Midnight Mass. That was the second time. Bly Manor was the first time he worked with Flanagan. So he's become a recurring character. But along those lines, a new actor, and I hope he shows up in more Flanagan stuff, was the Joker. His name is Mark Hamill.
Oh my God.
Mark Hamill, yeah. I hope he becomes a Flanagan regular. I thought he was great in this. He's such a cool
Hamill's character and portrayal in this series was amazing. And I didn't know Hamill was in this because I didn't want to look at the cast. I didn't want to look at anything before I watched it. I was like, all right, it's Flanagan, it's Poe, I'm watching it. I'm not looking into anything. And I'm watching it, and here comes the family's lawyer. The family's fixer is who he is. And it's Mark fucking Hamill in this like mob boss cleaner role. And he has connections all over town, and he plays it so straight. And watching his story develop was fun too, because towards the end, he's given it out. And he chooses not to take it.
That was another interesting conversation between him and Verna, in which there was like not so much compassion, but like kind of a mutual respect, which I thought was super interesting.
Yeah. Like they both admired each other's work.
Right, which is pretty dark. And everybody knows Mark. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and yeah, it was, they both kind of admired each other's work. And when you have, essentially death and the bringer of death sitting down and admiring each other's work over the span of one guy's lifetime, this is an eerie conversation to listen to.
And I was going to say, everybody knows Mark Hamill, like, by design, he can be very hammy, but he is the opposite of that. He's very stoic in this, and very serious, and he puts on the extra gruff voice. You know, it's
Yeah, he kind of drops down into the right in here. You know, that
lots of gravel. Yeah,
just
just pretty cool.
what do you want me to
Pretty cool
do,
character.
boss?
I mean,
You know,
equally
just-
despicable, but a cool character.
You know, and it was I'm going to talk like this for a minute because I just want to. You know, just listening to him talk, it was just really low. And you had to lean in to hear what he had to say because it was quiet and every word. And that's what I think I really liked about it was he didn't say much, but when he talked, you had to lean in and you had to listen because he didn't speak loudly. You know, it was very quiet, it was very deliberate, and he pulled you in to what he was saying. And as a huge nerd, huge Star Wars fan, I honestly, this is my favorite Mark Hamill role. Right. I'm calling it right now. This is right now my favorite Mark Hamill role. Loved him as Joker, loved him as Luke Skywalker. This is my favorite performance that I've seen him do. You know, just because it is so far out of what everyone knows him for. And it's not, you know, the hammy Mark Hamill. It's not the comedic Mark Hamill. It's a very serious, trained Mark Hamill. And it was fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. Jumping back real quick to the Black Cat and Raul, I will say, of the children, the main children, not like the granddaughter, Raul. I don't remember what his character's name was.
Leo.
You're right.
Interesting.
Leo, and
Leo
and
adopted
then,
the cat.
and then maybe a little bit the Goldbug lady later, a little bit. But I found Leo to be kind of the most sympathetic. He's still a jerk, and he blacked out and murdered a cat. But I found him to be he was a little bit more sympathetic, where it's kind of like, oh man, that kind of sucks. Like, you didn't necessarily need to go out like that, but whatever.
Except the messed up part is you find out he didn't black out and kill a cat. It was all an illusion.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I would say kind of the despicableness with him, especially a little bit like how all of the kids treat each other is pretty despicable.
Oh, yeah.
But the way he handles the cat situation and kind of they do make him despicable because he's got that chick in his apartment that he's trying to hide from his boyfriend when his boyfriend shows up. So like, you know, he's still a dirtbag, but I didn't necessarily feel like he was as big a dirtbag as some of the children.
He's a cleaner dirtbag than the rest of them.
Right.
I'm gonna say, which takes us to Victorine in The Telltale Heart.
Right.
Now, this was a pretty solid adaptation of The Telltale Heart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's got the hidden heart. She's tormented by this noise. Obviously, you don't realize till later it's the heart the heart mechanism she was making. But
when the dad comes over and starts hearing it too, that's when I was like, oh, where's this going? Like, he hears it too? That's pretty good.
It's like, oh, now, okay, maybe they're both going batshit crazy. No, you open a door and she straight murdered her girlfriend, fiance, significant other, and ripped her chest wide open. Like, that one leaned more into slasher territory.
Yeah, that was a pretty gory reveal. And maybe it's at this point we're getting quite a bit further into the series, and so I think it's kind of taking its toll on his name is Roderick, the patriarch of the family. Is
patriarch?
That his term?
Yep.
Because after this, like, there's 3 episodes after this, after the like reveal of that at the end of episode 5. He seems pretty shook the rest of this series.
Well, and after that, there's only 2 kids left.
Yep.
And those are his original 2, son and daughter.
Right.
And I would say they are arguably the most messed up out of all the kids, just mentally messed up. I mean,
it's interesting.
Daughter has this weird fetish that I don't even know how to describe or where it would come from.
First off, she wants to watch, but like not just that, because it's not just. I'm sure it is also the sexual aspect. I mean, it is sexual, but like she wants to like have a lady come over and basically take her place and like watch this lady and her husband have a nice dinner. And it's like, and that's like part of what's doing it for her. It's very strange. And I think the idea is like, she doesn't know how to
like have
that
a
kind of
life.
Yeah. And so that's kind of where the kink comes from.
Yes, it's very bizarre. But ultimately, that is her downfall. It's this other woman, which then turns out to be Berna. And admittedly, I'm not the greatest at anagrams. It was about episode 6 of an 8-part series that I realized Verna spells Raven.
Right.
I was like, God damn it.
Right. I don't even know when I key.
It's like, this should not have been that difficult.
That's all right. I'm not sure when I even keyed into what her name was. Probably towards the end when they like figured out who she was and pulled out the pictures of her with like world leaders going back hundreds of years,
Well, which leads me to, I would really love a Berna story. Just give me more of her.
Right?
And
she's an intriguing character.
Yeah.
And it's not just that she was an intriguing character, but also like, who played her? I have a list here. I just have to find it. Carla. I'll say Carla. I'm the worst with names, last names. Carla. Another Flanagan regular. She's in lots of Mike Flanagan stuff. I like the way she played it. That kind of made it more interesting. Like, and then thinking like during all the flashbacks, the conversation she's having with the siblings at the bar, and just like the personality she gives Death, which I could be played many ways, but like she definitely has a personality, and that made her a kind of compelling character for sure.
Well, and what I really loved is this character of Death, or the Harbinger of Death, or the Devil, or whatever ultimately you want her to be, played on so many different facets of folklore that she literally could be anything. And during her conversation with, I think it was Pym, Hamill's character, they even talk about it because, essentially the Devil at the Crossroads comes from her, and, all these other deals with the devil and different things like that all stem from her history. And it was just, it was fascinating to listen to her history and hear how they, wove all these like prominent stories from like real history into this, into this like one character that is just kind of in the guiding hand, as it were.
It's interesting, and maybe I guess that's the point, but like it's interesting that she, especially to Roderick, takes a very kind of like, she's very kind of judgmental. And I guess it's a matter of like, I offered you this deal, you could have done whatever you wanted with it, but she's very judgmental. It's like, well, he wouldn't have necessarily been able to be in that position to kick off this opiate epidemic had you not give him the scenario, and like she kind of made it possible. But whatever. I don't know. It kind of ties into jumping to the Pit and the Pendulum episode. The way it goes with Frederick is super interesting because Frederick just seems like an idiot. but he takes maybe one of the more evil turns in it. Um, and
Well, I
but
say,
she
and
definitely has a
the
moral
actor
judge.
is 100% is a Flanagan regular. Like when I think of a Flanagan project, that's who I think of.
Oh yeah, he's been. I hadn't seen him in anything forever. What was the first? Was it that Ouija prequel that Flanagan did?
I think so. Yeah.
I think that's the first time I noticed him, and I was like, "Who is that guy? He seems familiar." And Melanie's like, "It's Elliot from E.T." And I was like, "Oh my god, it is!"
Mhm.
And he's been in like, I think almost everything Flanagan's done since, and
Yep.
he's great. I I really like him in this role because that's the thing with like people, using the same people. He generally they're always good that the people he works with, but like you get to see an interesting range because his character in
Yeah.
this is very different from any of the other characters he's had in play.
Oh yeah. I mean, like you said, he's an idiot, but he
Yeah,
goes from idiot to like paranoid sociopath. That's his character arc in this. Idiot to like brutal murderer, and that's a hell of a trajectory.
and
He becomes this like coke fueled murderer, and it was just that's a hell of a path to end up on.
yeah, and to really like brutalize his wife like he did. But that's how I was gonna say. That's Verna definitely passes moral judgment, where she's like, "I had this thing plotted out for you. You were always gonna die here, but I wasn't gonna do this swinging pendulum thing until you broke out the fucking pliers or hammer or whatever it was to take out her teeth." And she's like,
for me.
she's very clear that it wasn't going to be as terrible of a death for him until he took that turn.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it was 100%. You made this bed. Congratulations.
right.
Yeah, I think he probably had, of the kids, the most probably painful death.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they kind of
'cause
bookend it because it's him. Trying to think of it.
it's
Think
him
of
and the youngest one.
yeah,
Like,
the acid,
the
bath.
acid and the pendulum.
Right, right. I'm sure the other ones were very unpleasant, but yeah, you're right. Those seem very bad. I've heard some people are kind of critical of this one. They're like, it's very Final Destination. It's like, well, I mean, it's death instigating, like orchestrating these kills that for the most part, look like accidents. It's very Final Destination in its nature.
Yeah, I mean, that's who the villain in Final Destination is death.
Mm-hmm.
You can't escape death. And if you're on day 12, you already heard this conversation. So kudos to you. That was honestly one of the things I really liked about this series was every death was meant to look accidental.
Right.
So it didn't point to murder. So it didn't implicate somebody else. It, accidental drug overdose, or in Leo's case, he jumped off his balcony. It's
right.
It was a very nice touch to end. Like, if you're going to end a bloodline, don't screw up somebody else's bloodline.
The show looked really good too. I was just looking at who directed it because, like I know for sure at least the first, was it The Haunting of Hill House? Was all Flanagan directing every episode, which has got to be exhausting. In Midnight Mass, I know he did, but I know some of the other series he kind of stepped back and was like, I don't need to direct every episode. So I was looking at this one, and the episodes were split between him and Michael Fimig. I'm not going to say the last name because I'm terrible about it. A different Mike. So he split the directing duties with somebody else on here. But I think the show looked very good. Especially I mentioned the color because he seemed like something he's very excited about. But yeah, the use of color in this is super interesting and very specific and intentional.
I say Bly Manor and Hill House are both very dark series.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was a lot more vibrant.
Yeah, very much.
And you know, the palette that was used was, you know, it was a lot more aesthetically pleasing. And that's not to say that the other two weren't, you know, because I mean, again, I will watch anything Flanagan touches. So that is not a knock on the other two at all. I love Hill House. I love Bly Manor. And for those stories, they needed to be dark. This would not have worked as well if the whole thing were dark.
Yeah,
now,
I think
it did have dark moments.
for sure. But I think stylistically it fits this kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it just makes it more interesting.
You know, like the cutaways with Roderick and the, who was it, like the district attorney sitting in the house having a scotch. Mm-hmm. Those were shot fairly dark.
Mm-hmm.
That made sense because that was a very dark, you know, dim scene. You know, Roderick's facing his mortality. It's, you know, it shows he's coming to an end, as opposed to the contrast of everything else happening in like real time in life. And the use of lighting and colors, the contrast was amazing.
Right. Real quick, you kind of mentioned it towards the beginning, but like in comparison to other Flanagan, specifically Flanagan Netflix things, Netflix series, I'll say, I've liked them quite a bit. The young adult one, what was it called? The Christopher Pike one. I kind of skipped over some of that one. I'll go back and revisit it sometime. But I kind of felt like he was maybe a little bit more hands off of that one anyway.
Yeah.
But you know, he even brought people over from that one, like the one that played the lady that played his wife, Froderick's. It's not Froderick. Is it Froderick? Not Froderick. Roderick's wife.
Roderick was the idiot kid.
Yeah, that's it. They always called him Froderick, which was pretty good. Roderick's wife in this, his like new wife, you know, she was from that other show that escapes me right now. So I can't count that one because I fell off of that one. I'll go back and revisit it sometime. You know, I don't know. It's somebody's home for terminal children or something. It's whatever it was called. I think I lost my credibility. But Bly Manor, Haunting a Hill House, Midnight Mass, which Midnight Mass was I think the only one that was like wholly his original idea, not necessarily an adaptation, although that's a little debatable because he takes, even in his original stuff, he takes, especially Midnight Mass, takes heavy influence from like Stephen King stuff. Which we're going to see a lot more Stephen King, Flanagan stuff coming out of his Amazon work. But I put Bly kind of at the bottom. I liked Bly, but it was leaned way more drama. Like it just was pretty heavy drama, which is fine. But I want to say out of all of them, I put this one kind of at the top. Midnight Mass was great, but I think I put this one at the top just for entertainment factor. This is more, it's quicker paced. It's got a different, it's not necessarily a meditation on mortality like kind of all of his other series are.
No, and I mean, it's in there.
Yeah, for sure.
There's, there's definitely moments of that in there, but it isn't a retrospective on a character's life. Like, okay, I'm going to die. This is what I did to get here. It's, okay, I'm dying and my world's crumbling down around me. Watching it, and I can't remember if I mentioned this to you or not, but I know I've mentioned it to other people. It reminded me a lot of Leo DiCaprio's Romeo and Juliet visually.
Okay.
Which then led me to want Flanagan to do Romeo and Juliet. because I would love to see him do a modern Romeo and Juliet, because I don't think it'd be as campy as DiCaprio's, but it would still have that same pacing, that same like we were talking, that contrast in color, the storytelling, and I think it would feel more like the tragedy that is supposed to, and not the love story it's been made out to be.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Flanagan's style definitely lends more to the tragedy than Baz Luhrmann's style does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of my biggest takeaways from this. Was it reminded me of, Romeo and Juliet, and I was just like, I wonder what he could do with Romeo and Juliet. And it's been a while since we've had a good Romeo and Juliet remake, so putting it out there, Mike, if you're listening, say hi. But if you're listening, Romeo and Juliet. But no, one of the biggest things in this series, this whole family, A, could have lived, and 2, wouldn't have been as despicable if the sister wasn't despicable. Madeline, I think, is the biggest key in this family puzzle. She pushed Roderick at the beginning, and she started the wheels turning on this whole machine that ultimately led to the demise of the Usher family.
It's not even really arguable. She's the main driving force behind pushing her brother to the dark side. But she's definitely, and it's interesting because, I mean, that whole like backstory with him and his first wife and all that, where he's kind of like living a good life, right? Like he writes his wife poetry, and like they're just like,
he was a good dude,
right? And then it's definitely the sister's influence of like, and also like the guy was legitimately getting screwed over, but the sister's influence of like, no, here's what we're gonna do. I mean, although ultimately he makes the choices, it's interesting because when it comes down to like, ultimately, okay, so here's the choice. You can either follow through on this deposition thing or the testimony thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And also there's the choice of like when they're sitting down talking to Verna in the bar. And it's interesting that when those choices come up, he seems to, without really flinching, make the bad choice, the morally
instantly
worst choice. And it's interesting because even like in the bar, him and his sister both have to agree to the deal they're making with Verna there. He's not hesitant at all, even though he's arguably has more to lose in the situation, because his sister does not plan on having children. So she doesn't care what happens to the bloodline, but she is more hesitant. She's hesitant for him. Like she seems kind of upset that he was just like, yeah, no, it's fine. Let's do this. Like she seemed more hesitant about it than he did, but also she was maybe taking it more seriously. And that's kind of what's reflected later on. Like even after all the kids are pretty much gone, he's still not totally taking it seriously, till the very end.
Up until like the very end, he was fighting it, that it was all just a hoax and just talking a bar.
Right.
Even when it was revealed that bar was never actually there. It was just, they got drunk and they imagined the whole thing. And I think that's why him and his first wife were so good for each other, because she was his moral compass.
Right.
You take that out of the equation, and he's going to, pull the trigger on any deal, and it's a slippery slope. And he started going down that slope quick.
The Midnight Club, that was the name of that series, that other series.
Yeah.
Did you watch that one?
I got about halfway through it.
I hate to say it, but yeah, me too.
I didn't stop for any particular reason. I got busy and forgot to go back to it.
Right. And I think that is probably for maybe the worst performing of the series he's done for them. It just kind of had a different vibe, which is fine. But I was gonna
It
say
missed
real
the drug. It missed the
right,
drug aspect. It didn't have that. You have to see what's next.
and it was real depressing. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, his stuff often is, but uh, it was more focused on the mortality aspect than like
yeah,
it's about death, but also it's spooky. And this one's like, no, it's about
yeah,
dying children. That's
yeah.
all. I was gonna say real quick the things he's got coming up, the things that are confirmed for his Amazon deal is The Life of Chuck, which is a movie based on a Stephen King short story, which I think is going to be a little bit more drama than anything because I don't think the original is actually like a horror story, but it's a story told in reverse chronological order. Oh, I guess there's haunted house stuff. Actually, now I've read a synopsis of it, and it does kind of sounds in line with like Haunting of Hill House type vibe.
Yeah,
And then also the Dark Tower, like as a series, I think, which is
which
I think
I'm super excited for.
right. And then the Season of Passage, which is a Christopher Pike story. So he's gonna revisit Christopher Pike stuff too. Anyway,
Well, and that does lead to where I wanted to go next. Was like, okay, so we know what's announced for him, and he's moving into Stephen King. He's moving into other territories. I would love to see him tackle like a Stephen King like a short story anthology. Again, back to our conversation a couple months ago. How do you make a good Children of the Corn? You add it to a short story anthology. Have Flanagan do a Stephen King short, much like Fall of the House of Usher, and let Children of the Corn be a story within that. And I think it would be beautiful.
man, a Flanagan Children of the Corn. I wonder. It's interesting because Flanagan has such like specific. I mean, at this point, they're kind of tropes that he goes for. He doesn't. I mean, not always, because a lot of his earlier movies weren't like a huge cast. In fact, like, was it Oculus was for the most part two people in a house for the most part, and like a couple other people in flashbacks. And then his first movie was like two people for the most part, but he seems to really like a big ensemble cast, and he's good. He does good with that. He writes that well.
Yeah.
So I can't picture. I don't know what a Children of the Corn from him would look like. See, from what I know of The Life of Chuck, it kind of makes sense because it has to do with a guy who grew up in a supposedly haunted house and whatever, and it's kind of weird told in reverse. So like that kind of makes sense. He does a lot of like flashbacks jumping back and forth in a story and a narrative, and children in a haunted house is like right up his alley, so
yeah, I say it's going to have that Bly Manor vibe, and it should be fun.
Right. I would like to see, I don't know, it's interesting because like Dr. Sleep, while a direct adaptation of Stephen King, felt kind of the least Stephen King of a lot of the things he's worked on, including non-Stephen King projects, I kind of want to, I'm curious, I don't know, I want to see him tackle something vastly different. And House of Usher was kind of that. It was kind of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a home run.
Yeah. I think it's my favorite of his Netflix work for sure.
Well, and like I said, as far as like, if you were going to pick a swan song, you couldn't have picked a better project to go out on. This is how you end your Netflix run.
I'm curious, not that it matters, but I get curious. I don't know. I think people generally look at this one favorably. I haven't heard a whole lot other than a couple of people are like, yeah, it's great. But like, yeah, I don't know. There's not as much buzz about it, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know what the general consensus on it is.
As I know there hasn't been a load of negative buzz. So that's always a positive.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Not a lot of negative equals a positive.
Right. Well, it's like even Midnight Mass, you heard a lot about, but it was kind of contentious because people didn't like the monologues.
Yeah.
But then the other half of the people, you know what? It's the internet again. I guess with this, there's just not enough people to argue about it for it to like become super notable. Like people have to be on the fence or on pick a side and start fighting before it really gets.
Well,
a lot
I
of
mean,
hype.
look, we came together on it.
Oh yeah, for sure. We don't.
I mean,
we
even
don't
if you were
disagree
talking
on
about this on Grawl Lakes, I wouldn't have combated you on anything.
right. Uh, it's funny. I'm like, you're the people
All
who
the House of Usher, the great equalizer.
right. Yeah, it's really good. I think it might have gotten a physical release. I don't remember, but I do know Flanagan's been very vocal about, along with other directors and stuff, and rightfully so, about just like the general disappointment with their work on streaming, especially since streaming services have been dumping stuff to save money. Like he's one of the ones who's been very vocal about disappointment and stuff not getting a physical release. And I think Midnight Mass was supposed to, but didn't for whatever reason. And he's one of the ones who's like, yeah, I've bought pirated copies of my stuff just so I can have it on physical. And that's something I see a lot.
A lot of his stuff has has so much rewatchability,
right?
So it doesn't. It's such a disservice to dump it,
right?
Just because the platform wants to save money, and ultimately it ends up costing him and the actors money, because there's people who want to rewatch it, and those would be residuals that no one's getting because, well, there's nothing there.
Right.
So sucks.
Well, in Netflix, while they're kind of notorious for canceling series prematurely, it seems, but like Glow, I'll forever be sour about that. They canceled Glow, and it's fine in the 4th season while they were filming the 4th season. Oh, that makes me so irritated. But they're not necessarily, I don't know them to dump shows that they own.
I'd say the shows, I don't think they dump as much as they do
just into the ether. That's kind of a Warner Brothers and Disney thing right now.
Yeah. Which slays me because Disney owns like the media of the world. So,
man, that Willow series was not necessarily great. It was kind of real bad in some aspects, but it was entertaining. They aired it for 6 months and then dumped it. Like, you can't find it's gone. It's like, you guys invested so much money into that show.
Potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those that had potential, and they didn't. They just needed to tweak some things and give it a little bit longer to marinate.
Canceling a show is one thing. Outright just dumping it so that they don't have to pay for the royalties or whatever the deal is, the licensing, to where it's just gone now. It's just in the ether, like it's nowhere. Man, that's real rough. If I was a creator on any of those projects, I'd be so upset.
Well, that's part of what the strike was about, was issues with streaming services. So hopefully it gets better.
Anyway, totally. That's been on my mind a lot lately, actually. Like, if you're a musician and you're kind of paying attention to anything with like streaming services, like that's kind of been a thing that's been an issue lately. Like, it's just, I don't know, physical media is more and more like, I mean, it's been dead for a while, but like stores are like Best Buys are no longer selling DVDs and Blu-rays, and I think Australia in general is like, nah, we don't need that anymore. Yet at the same time, then you get the streaming services that are just like, no, we're just gonna start dumping stuff, and you'll never be able to find it unless you pirate it. That's weird.
So we've gone backwards,
right?
And I walked into Walmart the other day to look for, and I know listeners, you're like, well, what does that have to do with anything? I was looking for a DVD for a couple different movies I'm planning on talking about next year. Their DVD section was gone. All except for like a shelf, one shelf of DVDs. And I asked the clerk what was going on. It's like, where did everything go? And it was, well, we're doing away with all that. I said, why? Well, they don't sell. So the only place I can get this movie is on streaming. And it's like, yeah, I looked it up and it's not streaming anywhere. So I have to order the physical online at an outrageous price. But what I do find interesting is while we're getting rid of physical media, vinyls have made a comeback.
Right. Cassette tapes too, apparently. The last few years have been somewhat popular. Not CDs though. CDs are not popular.
No.
I try to sell CDs. They are not popular. But yeah, vinyl and cassette tapes. And I kind of feel like physical media in general is just it's not a matter of it's becoming, it's a matter of it is that it's a niche product now. It's a niche audience. Was the guy like, oh, DVDs, sure, they're right over here with the phonographs, grandpa.
You know what I like about physical media? If your internet's out, you can still watch a movie.
Man, I've really been, so Spotify's been real janky with like whatever. I don't have to get into the whole thing. It's totally off topic, but I'm probably going to pull my music off of Spotify here at the end of the year, which is coming up in a couple weeks. And it's long since been like Bandcamp for musicians is like a very popular service, but they've been bought and sold a couple times and they're kind of in a shaky place to where it's like music you like could disappear off a streaming service for any reason at any time. It could be a rights issue. It could be if it's a smaller artist like myself, if I stop paying DistroKid, like the service I use to distribute stuff, my music comes off all the streaming sites. And then if Bandcamp goes under, like that music's just gone. Even digital download, you have a hard drive crap out, it's gone. So I've kind of like been making a push for physical media in that respect, just because it's like, short of you losing it, it's not going anywhere. Nobody can take it. Like, rights holders can't take it or anything like that. I don't know. But at the same time, streaming is super convenient. I get it. That's not something like, it's not going to go away, but I think there is a problem. And I feel like this is relevant. Backup. Yeah. And I feel like this is relevant for your show because it's for horror fans. And most of the time horror fans are going to be horror movie collectors and stuff like that. And so I don't know. I feel like physical media should never necessarily go away. Like it should always be a viable option.
Well, before we go away, Randy, where
yes,
up to date with everything you have coming out, and obviously not Spotify, but where can listeners follow you?
Spotify. Hey, Spotify. I'm so tempted to get into it. The whole thing with Spotify is if a song gets less than 1,000 streams, they're just not going to pay you your royalties. They're going to give those royalties to larger artists. So they will still stream your music. People will listen to your music, but they will take and pay that money to larger artists. Yeah, screw Spotify. Anyway, first off, as you probably know, listener, you can find more of this show on electronicmediacollective.com or emcpodnet, as in podcast network, if that's easier to remember, emcpod.net. You can find more of my stuff at Grawlix Podcast. It's GRAWLIX podcast.com. Or for my music stuff, go to my website, not Spotify. Go to my website. It's Super Science, all one word, superscience.xyz. I know it's weird. Just go with it.
Explanations in the Children of the Corn episode.
Right.
He already told you where to head over to Electronic Media Collective. So if you want to just follow me, head over to Facebook, X, and YouTube at Moose Media Inc. Just look for the Moose. And
just look for the Moose. Sorry.
I know, gets you every time.
I don't know why. I think I forget about it every time. That's why. Sorry.
It's funny. Jesse is the one that your co-host is the one that actually threw that out one time, and I just took it and ran with it.
That's funny. It's so good.
And yeah, Randy, this was great. And listeners, longtime listeners should know that he'll be back again in the next month or so, along with Billy Peck to do our horror year in review. And we'll be nice. We'll split it up this time, so it's not as it's easier to digest. And I will put his links in the episode description. As always, tune in tomorrow for the final day of Christmas and the season 5 premiere of Moose's Monster Mash. I will be covering Christmas, Bloody Christmas with Santa himself, Abe Ben Ruby. Randy, thank you again.
Mm-hmm. Thank you
for spending this time with me. And until next time, Horror Hounds, mash on.
Merry Christmas.